Are you looking to sharpen your skills, boost productivity, or take your career to the next level? The IISE Training Center offers world-class professional development built for busy engineers, managers, and problem solvers. Whether you're diving into analytics, earning a Lean Six Sigma certification, or exploring supply chain logistics, our expert-led courses deliver practical tools with real results. Learn online or in person with options tailored to every career stage. Plus, our training works. Past participants have applied their knowledge to save their companies over $250 million in real-world projects, and 90% of Lean Six Sigma candidates pass their exam on the first try. Visit iise.org/training to explore the full course catalog and start transforming your career today.
Here's the problem. When companies decide where to build, expand, or relocate, that one decision shapes everything that comes next. Hiring, productivity, supply chains, cost, and long-term risk. And yet, too often, those decisions are driven by gut instinct, outdated assumptions, or short-term incentives. But before the buildings, jobs, and supply chains, there's complex systems thinking. Today on Problem Solved, we're talking to someone who applies industrial and systems engineering at a scale most people don't even realize exists. Ramya Gowda is a managing director at Newmark, a leading commercial real estate advisor to global corporations, where she leads strategic consulting and site selection, location strategy, and labor analytics. She helps organizations make some of the biggest decisions of their careers. Ramya, welcome to Problem Solved. We are so glad to have you here.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm excited to be here.
And you've had a really interesting career, and it's been kind of international now. You've earned several of your degrees in India and then in Illinois State University. So I'm just curious, when you started out in industrial engineering, did you think that it would lead you here?
No. Yeah, when I started out of industrial engineering, it's a very common thinking that you always think industrial engineer is mostly related to manufacturing. That's where you want to be. And this all happened so organically. I was working at Bosch as an industrial engineer. I came across this opportunity at Newmark. It was for their site selection team. So the role, it was actually looking for someone with a supply chain background and someone with the building financial models, working with industrial, in an industrial setup. A lot of that was very similar to what I did at Bosch, though it was not on the consulting side. I was more on the corporate side. That's something that the company was looking for, and I joined Newmark.
So let's just maybe help some of our other listeners understand, starting very simply. If you're say you're at a dinner party or something and you're just explaining to somebody who may not be an industrial systems engineer, if you're explaining to somebody what you do, how do you explain it?
Yeah. So, when a company wants to build a manufacturing plant or an office or a data center, often they have multiple locations to pick from. And so what we do is we help these companies compare those locations using data, real world constraints, and strategy, helping them make that decision. We help them pick a location that actually works for them, not just looks good on paper. A very good example is when we are buying a home, we are not just looking at the price, right? We are looking at the proximity to good schools or commute and the quality of living and how are the amenities. So we are looking at so many things. It's a very similar thinking, but we do for corporations and communities. Often for these kind of projects, there are millions and billions of dollars at stake. So it becomes, as location strategy consultants, we help the clients make those decisions.
So like buying a home, but times 1,000.
Right.
So it's a location decision. So if one of these location decisions, say it goes badly or they choose wrong, what are the consequences for these corporations?
Yeah, so if they choose a wrong location, there's never a wrong location. It's just that that wasn't the location that was fit for them. Okay. So what happens if they end up being in a location that was not a good fit for them? They may face labor workforce challenges, and they may face limitations for infrastructure, and there will be regulatory delays, and they may experience higher operating costs. So it's kind of like they will start experiencing these problems if they don't choose the location right. And if you have already built the manufacturing plant in that location, it can be really expensive to undo that decision. It's not very practical to like, let's not do it now. Once you are like down the line, build a manufacturing plant, it can be really expensive to undo the decision.
Yeah, it could kind of ultimately make or break the
Yeah,
company.
right.
So, I mean, it
Right.
could be catastrophic eventually.
Yeah. I mean, location is always a strategy first and then the real estate. We don't want to think about buildings or land on day one. We want to think about it as a strategy and then think about, what kind of building you want to get into. So if it's a bad product, you can always fix it. But if you end up in a location that's not a good fit for you, it eventually, it's hard to get out of that situation. It will take some time. It's going to follow you for decades.
Yeah. Okay, so you've already kind of shown how it's a lot more complicated than just choosing like a geographic location. So let's kind of zoom out and, talk about the systems behind it. What are the other decisions that fall underneath that location decision?
Yeah, so think of this location decision more like an upstream system. So if this system is not working fine, your internal performances will struggle. So what's happening in this upstream system of deciding about a location? So we got the infrastructure, we got workforce, and then we have cost conditions, be it with taxes or labor cost or power cost, and also the regulatory delays. Think about the permitting and how do we go through all the permitting process. So if all the factors that are involved in this system don't work well, your internal processes will struggle, and there will be unnecessary additional costs and delays that will eventually the company has to deal with.
Yeah, that's quite a lot to think through. So is there something that you see companies or corporations consistently maybe overlook or underestimate when they're choosing this huge decision of location?
Yeah, so most of the time, what happens is companies, they underestimate the timelines and relationships. They tend to underestimate those two important things. Most of the time, these projects take more time than planned because there might be some delays with permitting or the infrastructure was not ready yet. So what becomes very important for our projects is the relationship with economic development organizations. They are highly supportive for all our clients. They help make those right connections, be it the workforce agencies or utility companies or permitting agencies. They make those right connections so we can expedite some of those process, and there are not unnecessary delays. And working with the right partners really will help the company transition into just become part of the community, and so that will reduce the risk and also avoid some of the delays.
Yeah. Yeah, I can easily see how the timeline would be underestimated because that's
Yeah.
just so complicated so quickly.
Yeah, and couple more things the companies, right? What they really need to do on their end, even before they start a project, like when they want to be like, oh, where should we expand? They should think about why they want to do that. Is there a shift in their customer base, or they're having talent challenges in their existing location, or some logistics challenges, or they want to grow in a different region, or this is a cost reduction operation. They need to be clear about why they are doing this exercise even before they start. There should be some alignment. And very important is that they need to align their internal stakeholders. We as a location strategy consultant require a lot of input data from different teams like HR, the supply chain team, and we also ask questions to the operations team and legal. So there are different teams involved. So it's very important for the organization to make sure their internal stakeholders are aligned. So they know what's the risk involved, what's the timeline, and what are the important criteria they need to sign off on, when they need to sign off on those criteria. So if they set up all these things right in the beginning, it just helps overall to avoid some unnecessary delays and some misalignments down the line.
Yeah. You sent me some articles which I read, and what you just said kind of reminded me. You ended one of your articles, and I'll link your articles in our show notes because they're really interesting. But you ended one with the leadership should ask where, not necessarily where should we go, but they should be asking, are we ready to decide where to go?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which I thought was really interesting. And then you talk about the term decision science. Can you kind of talk, I think you were going through some of that just now, but can you unpack that a little bit more, maybe a little bit more step by step for the industrial engineers listening? That term decision science is really, really interesting.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So decision science, in our project, we build a lot of decision models. What these decision models are the analytical foundation of our projects. The models really look into hundreds of criteria around utilities, around talent availability, cost of living, quality of living, infrastructure. So it looks into different criteria, and we choose the criteria along with the client, what really matters to their business. And we also allocate weights to these criteria. So we want to see the locations we have shortlisted. So when we start a project, think of it as a funnel. In the beginning, we have like so many locations to choose from. Say, for example, we have 25, 30 locations to choose from, but we want to use our decision-making model to come down or rank those locations to see how they rank across this entire system that works well for our client. So we are slowly getting down that funnel of 20 locations to, we are down to say like 5 or 6 locations. So this model helps us to look at different aspects that's important. Every project is different. Criteria keeps varying for these projects. The weights keep varying. So that's something a very important, a central part of the analysis we do. And we also do like the simulation, the sensitivity analysis. We see what happens if we change some weights. If we say the cost is important, what happens to the other variables? We do sensitivity analysis around that. So it really helps our clients to see and look at different scenarios and make those defensible decisions. So really, these models are central for our analysis. To give some examples of what we call critical location factors. So think of like what's the labor force available within the 30 minutes drive time from the site identified, or how many welders are there within 30 minutes, how many machinists are there, how many software engineers are there. So it's like we can get to that level of detailed analysis. And also what's the natural disaster risk for the 10 locations you have identified, and what's the cost of living index. And we are also evaluating the real estate. So we look at different things which is really important for the client. So that's how decision science becomes very important to align different stakeholders. I think it just creates that confidence when they're making decisions.
Yeah. I have a question about working with the C-suite executives who ultimately kind of you present the data to them and then they ultimately have to make the decisions. Do you have trouble conveying this kind of analytical data? Because maybe some leadership is more focused on the bottom line or value driven numbers. Do you ever have trouble conveying this kind of data to them, or is there ever a disconnect with that?
Right. No, that's a good question. So we always look at when we are presenting to them, they are not seeing all the model. They are not seeing what's happening at the back end. They are really looking at the translated data into results and charts, and it's more digestible. So the executives, they really need decisions that can be presented to their board, their stakeholders, and also their investors. They want some clear decisions that are defensible, transparent. So even they work with decision science and also site selection experts like us, we help them make the choices more transparent and defensible so that they can present it to their stakeholders. So when we are working on a project, we work with different internal stakeholders too. Like I mentioned, we work with the HR, logistics, and operations. So even within that internal team, there is a lot of opinions. Somebody might like location A. They all have a preset notion about a location. It's like we like A then more than B. So it's important for us to make sure they all see the same picture as what really works for the organization. So what helps us to bring them all together is data science here, the decision science, what we discussed. So it really, in the initial stages, it helps us to keep them all together. When in our later stages of project, what we do is when we are down to like 3 or 4 locations, we are visiting those communities. We are talking to employers there. We are talking to different organizations, kind of, seeing how our desktop analysis compared to what we are really seeing on the ground. This experience even strengthens that confidence around the choices they have. So following that kind of structured process reduces the risk. And for executives, what's our role is to translate the complex analysis into fewer choices. So they have those fewer choices in hand, and we are also explaining them what are the trade-offs with those choices. We are making it very clear what works with these choices and what does not work, so that they can present it to their board, and it's more like a board defensible recommendations.
Yeah. And how does the role of supply chain play into that decision?
Yeah, most of our like industrial projects, supply chain is a very key part of it, right? Like, so when we work on our projects, what we do is we map their customers, we map their suppliers, think of all these dots in different places, and we really map them, and we identify where the centroid of these customers are, where the centroid of the suppliers are, and how far are the suppliers or customers from their existing locations, and what's the cost associated with the logistics, getting the parts in or getting the parts out, products out. And so we look at those different aspects, and now we have a list of locations, right? We test different scenarios. What happens if the facility is moved to a location A? What happens to that logistics cost? We look at the locations from a supply chain angle. It still works for the client, and they are still able to maintain those service levels they're supposed to maintain.
Maybe you can answer this, maybe you can't. I don't know. If you can't, I'll cut it out. But can you say like a company or a corporation that you've worked with that like just stands out?
There are so many. I don't want to like bring up any names.
I didn't think you could.
Like most of all the projects we work with, when we start working with them, the fun part is they have a code name. We always deal with like the confidentiality, and the reason is, they just want to make sure they don't want distractions. They really want to think through the strategy. They don't want distractions of, somebody contacting them, where they are. Are you all planning to come to our state? And nobody does that, but it's still that just to stay focused, we make sure the projects have a code name, and we choose a code name from beginning till a point where everybody is ready to share who they are. So there is a lot of the confidentiality comes to picture in our projects. There are some projects we are open to. Like there are some announcements where the companies announce. They are. We can share their names, but there are some projects which we never end up like sharing the names at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I remember when Amazon was looking for their new headquarters or whatever. I'm not saying that Newmark was involved in that project, but I just remember when they did make it public that they were looking for a new city to put their headquarters. Why do you think that they made it public? Is it just because they wanted the cities to compete for them to come?
Yes. Yeah. They wanted the cities to compete. It was an interesting process. Yeah.
Yeah. Just on that note, kind of the other side of your work is that you do work with communities who are looking for corporations to come to them. So what does that side of your work look like? You do work on the flip side of that, where you are working with cities who want, corporations or companies to kind of set up in their community. What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So along with advising companies, we also work with communities and economic development organizations to help them attract right kind of businesses. And so how do we do this? We study the workforce in that community. We study what kind of infrastructure is available, utilities. We look at their strengths. We look at their opportunities. This is a very deep, we do multiple interviews, like we talk to different organizations, and what the outcome of this is a data-driven roadmap for these communities that will help them to attract businesses. And we always work with clients, right? So we know what's important to these clients. So it helps us to apply some of those principles when we are working with the communities. So we can help them position themselves better. And also at the same time, this is not being done to just win one project. We are working with them to help them build an ecosystem that can support innovation, attract future jobs and future industries. So it's more like a strategic activity we do with communities that really helps them on long run.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So on this side of your work and on the other side, there's so many like factors that you really can't control. I mean, we're coming out of the pandemic still. And then there's things like natural disasters. How do you, like, for example, remote work? That was a trend that has really, never really gone back to normal. So how do you measure all of these things that, you can't really control, or you don't know how it's going to turn out when you're trying to put all this into your decision science models?
When we start our projects, we do something called as a fatal flaw screening. In that process, that's when we know like some criteria are really important to this client. For example, a flight to location A, a non-stop flight. That's it. If they say this is really required for us, without this location has to be eliminated. So that kind of flaws we cannot really, it's fixed. We cannot really change them, or we cannot do anything. For example, if they say we don't want to be in a location which has higher exposure to natural disaster, it's like an earthquake or something, because of the process they do. Some of the advanced manufacturing processes, they cannot take those vibrations. They should not be next to a railway track. They have some conditions called as like these are the must conditions. So but there are some other things which can be controlled, which can be changed, with some discussions, which can be addressed. If they see that there is a little bit of the welders, we need like a pipeline of the welders to be built. You can work with the workforce organizations and build that pipeline, but you can't do anything about the earthquake risk they have, right? Or if you identify that, some things can still be controlled, even with the earthquake risk. Though I think the building infrastructure can address some of that. So it's just making them aware of the criteria itself. Just opens up, just reduces the risk overall.
Yeah. So I'm just curious a little bit about your career arc and how you got to this point. So how did your early work in like lean and operations, you said that you worked at Bosch. How did all of that shape what you do now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my background in lean and working on the operations side really helped me to look at problems in a clear way, and try to understand the problems in a clear way, ask better questions, and looking at solutions that can really create some value. So having worked on the other side, I understand some of the challenges that comes with timelines, priorities, and budgets. So I've been in those shoes those days. So now when I'm in the consulting role, I can get into that the client's shoes and understand some of the challenges they face. And I think that kind of mindset always stayed with me.
Yeah. And so you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but what do you think that like early career industrial engineers misunderstand about where this degree can take them in their career?
Yeah, sure. Like I said, in the industrial and systems engineer, we tend to think it's limited to manufacturing, but really the degree is helping them design better systems across industries. It's not just one industry. It doesn't limit them to one career path. It actually opens up many options for them. We always see industrial engineers work as consultants, and we see them work as in the operations. They can be the ESG consultants, and they can be the facility engineers and workplace managers and utility expert, infrastructure expert. So I have seen industrial engineers in these different roles. It's only because they are trained to, design better systems across different industries. It just doesn't limit them to one industry.
Yeah. And so this work, I would imagine, it's probably taken you kind of all over the world.
It does, yeah. Our projects, they are spread across US and outside of US too. We work internationally too. And yeah, just 2 years back, I was in India with the clients. That was very interesting. And we do field work outside of US too. And it definitely takes you to different places, and it's a very good learning experience. You learn about that community. What you know about that community is just on papers, right? And you have a perspective, but when you actually visit those locations, it really changes. And it definitely changes the perspective you have. Whenever I visit a location with a client, I always come back, I can actually live here. It's always changes the perspective we have.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, that would be really neat. So if somebody is an ISE is listening who is interested in getting into this type of work, what do you think are the skills that they need to maybe kind of focus on?
Yeah, so like I said, the industrial systems engineering, they are designing better systems, right? It opens up options for them. So what's really important is the analytical thinking, curiosity, and being able to build decision models, simulation models, and have an understanding of the supply chain, and do trade-off analysis. More than everything, we need to understand how to translate that data into board-ready, defensible decisions. They don't want to see all the data. They want to see what's coming out of the data. I think that's the challenge we learn with experience.
Yeah. So turning now to the focus to maybe leadership who is making some of these decisions, if you could leave them with a piece of advice, what would you leave them with?
Yeah, so if we need to leave a message to the leadership, a perfect location or an optimal location is something that's operationally ready. They're resilient, and they also meet the strategic objectives of the organization. And also, there is no perfect location. There are always trade-offs. Trying to understand what trade-offs are important to your strategic goals of the organization is important. And also, when we are deciding about a location, don't go with a location if you think like, this works today, but make sure to ask what works in the next 10 years. What would will this location work for us in the next 10 years? I think will help the leadership to make those right decisions.
Yeah. Well, that's been fascinating. I've got to say, I don't think I ever stopped to think about all that was involved in those kinds of decisions. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm sure that our listeners appreciated it too. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
A big thank you to our guest, Ramya Gowda, and thank you to our listeners. Make sure you subscribe to Problem Solved so you never miss an episode. And if you're enjoying the podcast, leave us a review and share with a colleague. Every great solution is a story worth telling.